Okay, this is going to be lecture 5 of your AutoCAD introduction class. Okay, in this one we're going to take a look at some more projections, and I know we briefly discussed this way back in the first lecture, but now we're going to take a closer look at it. And now we're going to also define what the primary views, secondary views, and auxiliary views are. And then lastly, we're going to go ahead and take a look at isometrics. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is remember that, like I said in the first lecture, is that we're in the United States, we use the third angle projection, and the international standard is going to be the first angle projection. I also told you to remember how these shapes look, because the projections are basically off of them. And if you think about it, this is going to be our third angle projection, and if you imagine this as a truncated kind of pipe shape, and if I look at it going to the right side, it'll give me that appearance. And once again, if I'm looking at it this way, it'll give me that appearance. And these are going to be our first angle projection. So remember, more importantly, that in the United States, we're going to use the ANSI method, and that's going to be our third angle projection. And the ISO standard, they like to use first angle projection. And if you take a look at these diagrams here, you can see the differences between the two. So if I have this shape and I'm looking at it this way, the right side is going to actually be the right side of how it looks this way. If I'm using the international standard, if I'm looking at it this way, once again I look at the right side, it's actually the left side. So you can see that's kind of what it's doing here. Here's my front view. The left side is my right side and the right side is my left side. Whereas the top is my bottom and the bottom is my top. So that's why in this case I think it's a lot easier, and I'm glad that the ANSI standards take care of using the third angle projections, because it makes sense more to me naturally. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the views that we have. Okay, so in AutoCAD, we typically are going to have a top view, a front view, and a right side view. Those are going to be our three primary views. So when I create an object, I'm going to have the front view, then I'll have a right side view, and I'll have a top view. Now, sometimes you can get away with doing an isometric view because it incorporates all three of these views. If you take a look at the isometric that I have here, here's the front side view, here's the right side view, and here's the top view. So you can see all three views whenever you're constructing an isometric of those three primary views. So sometimes you'll see people will give an isometric and then they'll do dimensions off of their isometric, and that can justify their primary views. But typically, you're going to go ahead and create the front view, the right side, and the top view. Now take in mind, the front view should always be the view that has the most, I want to say, description, or most parts or most things that you can dimension to. So once we get into dimensioning in intermediate, you'll understand this a little bit more, because we're going to have to select which one we're going to define as our front view, and then our right view and top views will project off of that. Okay. Our secondary views are going to be all the other ones. So I will have a bottom view. I can also have my left side view, and I can have a back view. Now, the reason why these are not the part of the primary is because basically I can cover everything I need to know in those other views, but you can use these views if you have something that you want to show. But you're going to have to project off of it and show that it is the correct ones that you're projecting. So make sure that you label your views if you're going to use some of these secondary views. The primary views you typically don't have to label, because they're the primary views, and most people can understand that if I have a front view, I have a right view, and I have a top view. Okay. The other type of view that we have an auxiliary view. So for example, I have this little extrusion that's on the front of this face here, and I want to see that, and if you notice that in my right side view, I don't get a true view of it, and in my top view, I don't get a true view. So I can use an auxiliary view, which is this view, and now I can see that that is a true view of that circle. So if I want to dimension that circle, that's probably about the best way that I'm going to be able to dimension that if I want to show that circle in its true form. So I'll use an auxiliary view. Okay. Isometrics. When we're creating isometric, there are some rules to it. So for example, the line should be at a 30 degrees or some variance of that. And what I mean by that, it can be 0, 30, 60, 90, 120, 150, 180, and so on. So it has to be some form on that. It can't have any of those special things unless we have an angle. And when we deal with angles, when we create an isometrics, I always let that be the last line that I can possibly create. So I don't have to try to figure out what that line distance is in an isometric view. Number two, we can't use circles. So we can't use the circle command when we're creating isometric view. We have to use iso circles. Number three, we cannot use the fillet commands and offset commands. So those got to be avoided at all possible costs. And in the examples that I give you, we're going to create an isometric view. And what we have to do is we either have to make a copy of that line to create an offset. And to do a fillet, we actually have to go ahead and make an iso circle and do some trimming and things of that nature. Okay. When you create an isometric view, it does not have to be to scale. Typically, your isometric view is nothing more than a reference. Now, the only reason I say that it can be according to the scale is if you're going to put dimensions on it. It makes your life so much easier if you create it at scale, if you plan on dimensioning it. But for what we need in this class, it can be any size that you want it to be. Okay, so it's just nothing more than a reference. But I will create it originally as a 1-to-1 scale of my representation of my drawing. And then once I add it to my drawing, I'll tend to scale it down. So for what we're going to do, we're going to create them at full scale, and we're not going to worry about scaling them down. So we're just going to learn how to create an isometric. Okay? And lastly, the isometric is a representation of the front, top, right side view, which I showed you in an earlier example.